This opium is a part of the treatment in pain management. So, we have to know more about this opium and the opium plants. Actually, this opium plant it is very beautiful and it is a blessing, at the same time it is a beast. To say about the facts about opium poppy seed that pot exuding latex from a cut. To say about the geographical origin of this opium, it is uncertain, possibly Asia Minor or Spain or southern France and northwestern Africa. The active ingredients of opium are morphine, codeine, noscapine, papaverine and thebaine. The main producers are Afghanistan, Burma, Colombia, Laos, Mexico, India, Pakistan, Thailand, Turkey and China. And to say about the main consumers of opium, it is used worldwide, especially in Europe also. And we can go about some facts about opium. The wholesale price of opium is $3,000 per kilogram. That is, it was the statistics in the 2002. And the retail price is $16,000 per kilogram, again as per the 2002 statistics. And it is legally approved in certain countries. It is controlled in Australia as per the rule S8, and in Canada it is scheduled 1 drug. In some other countries, special prescriptions are required for the use of opium. In UK it is classified under class A, and in US it is under scheduled 2 drugs. In India, the NTPS Act 1985 is relating to the opium use. To say about this opium means, scientific name is Lacrima papaveris, that is poppy tears, and is dried latex obtained from the seed. Capsules of opium poppy, that is Papaver somniferus. Approximately 12% of the opium is made up of the analgesic alkaloid morphine, which is processed chemically to produce heroin and other synthetic opioid for medicinal use and for illegal drug trade. The latex also contains the closely related opiates codeine and thebaine. And non-analgesic alkaloids such as papaverine and noscapine also is there in opium. See the beautiful flower of opium. Really it is beautiful now. Just go through the different the slides of this opium flower. And this is poppy seeds. Just look into the slides and you can see that this poppy seeds, and it is collected. So, you can see that decorative seeds in capsules, and in certain area the seeds used on breads, the seeds are used for tappings on cakes also. So, how to obtain latex from this opium? The traditional labor intensive method of obtaining the latex is to scratch, that means core, the immature seed pods by hand. The latex leaks out and dries to sticky yellowish residue that is later scraped off and dehydrated. The word meconium derived from the Greek for opium like, but now used to refer the newborn baby's stools, historically referred to related weaker preparations made from the other parts of opium poppy or different species of poppies. How to obtain latex? The production methods have not changed since ancient times. Though selective breeding of papaver somniferum plant, the content of the phenanthrene alkaloids, morphine, codeine, and to a lesser extent thebaine has been greatly increased. In modern times, much of the thebaine, which often serves as the raw material for the synthesis for oxycodone, hydrocodone, hydromorphine, and other semi-synthetic opiates, originate from the extracting Papaver oriental or Papaver bracteatum. In modern times, much of the thebaine, which often serves as the raw material for the synthesis for oxycodone, hydrocodone, hydromorphine, and other semi-synthetic opiates, originate from the extracting Papaver oriental or Papaver bacteria. Just see the poppy pads, and we can look into the method how to obtain this latex. When grown from opium production, the skin of the ripening pods of these poppies is cored by a sharp blade at a time carefully chosen so that rain, wind and dew cannot spoil the exudation of white milky latex, usually in the afternoon. Incisions are made while the pods are still raw, with no more than a slight yellow tint, and most shall be to avoid pertaining hollow inner chambers or loculi while cutting into the lactiferous vessels. Incisions are made 3 or 4 times at intervals of 2 to 3 days, and each time the poppy tears, which dried to a sticky brown resin, are collected the following morning. 1 acre harvested in this way can produce 3 to 5 kilograms of raw opium. See, that's how opium is harvesting. Look the picture, and this is opium poppy seed pod after exuding the latex from a cut. And to say about the harvesting opium, raw opium may be sold to a merchant or broker on the black market, but it usually does not travel far from the field before it is refined into morphine base, because pungent jelly like raw opium is bulkier and harder to smuggle. Crude laboratories in the field are capable of refining opium into morphine base by a simple acid base extraction. A sticky brown paste, morphine base, is pressed into bricks and it is dried in sun, and can either be smoked, prepared into the other forms or processed into heroin. See, this is poppy crop. This is in Malwa in India. Illegal drug trade. For the illegal drug trade, the morphine is extracted from the opium latex and it is reduced to bulk weight by 88%. It is then converted to heroin, which is almost 2 times as potent and increases the value by a similar factor. The reduced weight and bulk make it easier to smuggle. And to say about the timeline of opium, wild to wilderness. And we can go to the ancient history of opium. The Mediterranean region contains the earliest archaeological evidence of human use. The oldest known seeds date back to more than 5000 BC in the Neolithic age, with the purpose such as food, anesthetics and ritual. Evidence from ancient Greece indicates that opium was consumed in several ways, including inhalation of vapors, suppositories, medical poultices, and as a combination with the hemlock for suicide. The Sumerian, Assyrian, Egyptian, Indian, Greek, Roman, Persian and Arab empires all made widespread use of opium, which was the most potent form of pain relief then available. allowing ancient surgeons to perform prolonged surgical procedures also. They also use this opium, and opium is mentioned in the most important medical texts of the ancient world. Apothecary vessel for storage of opium, this is that. It is a pharmaceutical used, It was in 18th and 19th century and it was there in Germany. And to say about the spread of opium, as per the power of Roman Empire declined, the lands to south and east of the Mediterranean Sea became incorporated to the Islamic empires. Some Muslims beliefs hadiths such as Shah Bukhari prohibits every intoxicating substance, though the use of intoxicants in medicine has been widely permitted by scholars. Dioscorides, there is 5 volumes, it has 5 volumes, De Materia Medica, the precursor of pharmacopoeias, remained in use. The Dioscorides, that means the 5 volume of De Materia Medica, the precursor of pharmacopoeias, remained in use from the 1st to 16th centuries and described opium and the wide range of its uses prevalent in the ancient world. Between 400 and 1200 Christian era, Arab traders introduced opium to China and to India by 700 CE. Opium uses in Java, we can go into that, this Dutch colonial period after in the Christian era, 1870. The canon of medicine, we can say that it is a canon of medicine. The standard medical textbook Paracelsus burned in a public bonfire 3 weeks after being appointed professor at the University of Basel in 1483, also described the use of opium. Though many Latin translations have only poor quality, Laudanum was originally to say about the canon of medicine 1483, that is a translation of Latin translation of Avicenna's book. Use of opium as a cure. Use of opium as a cure all was reflected in the formulation of Mithridatum described in the 1728 chambers of Cyclopedia, which included true opium in the mixture. Subsequently, laudanum became the basis of many popular patent medicines of the 19th century. Compared to other chemical available in the 18th century, regular physicians, opium was the benign alternative to the arsenics, mercury or emetics, and it was remarkably successful in all alleviating a wide range of ailments. To say about the medical use of opium, due to the constipation often produced by the consumption of opium, it was one of the most effective treatments for cholera, dysentery and diarrhea. It was used as a cough suppressant. Opium was used to treat bronchitis, tuberculosis and other respiratory illness. Opium was traditionally prescribed for rheumatism and insomnia. Medical textbooks even recommended its use by people in good health, that is to optimize the internal equilibrium of the human body. And to know about the opium in early century, soldiers returning home from the 3 crusades, that in between 1096 and 11,092, that is in the 11th to 13th century, brought opium with them. Opium is said to have been used for recreational purposes from the 14th century onwards in Muslim societies. Ottoman and European testimonies confirm that from the 16th to 19th century, Anatolian opium was eaten in Constantinople as much as it was exported to Europe. And to know about the history of opium in 18th century, during the 18th century, opium was found to be a good remedy for nervous disorders. Due to its sedative and tranquilizing properties, it was used to quiet the minds of those with psychosis, help with the people who were considered insane, and also to help treat patients with insomnia. However, despite its medicinal value, in these cases, it was noted that in cases of psychosis, it could cause anger or depression, and due to the drug's euphoric effects, it could cause depressed patients to become more depressed after the effects of after effects of. It was noted that in the case of psychosis, it could cause anger or depression, and due to the drug's euphoric effects, it could cause depressed patients to become more depressed after the effects of this drug. Opium in 19th century, if we go to the history of opium in 19th century, the standard medical use of opium persisted well into the 19th century. US President William Henry Harrison was treated with opium in 1841, and in the American Civil War, the Union Army used 80,000 kilograms of opium tincture and powder and about 5 lakh opium pills also. During this time of popularity, users called opium as God's own medicine. An Ottoman opium seller, this is a picture that in a view of in an artist's view. An opium done in 18th century China through the eyes of a Western artist, because all are using this opium. You just go through the slide and see the picture. Opium is a recreational drug. The earliest clear description of the use of opium as a recreational drug in China came from Suo Boling, who wrote in 1483 that opium was mainly used to aid masculinity, strengthen sperm and regain vigor, and that it enhances the art of alchemists, sex and court ladies. A century later, Li Xinzhen listed standard medical uses of opium in his renowned Compendium of Materia Medica, that was in 1578, but also wrote that lay people use it for the art of sex. In particular, the ability to arrest seminal emission. This association of opium with sex continued in China until the end of the 19th century. This is a photograph of a Chinese opium house. They are using this opium. Just go through the slide now. And another is opium smoking. Opium smoking began as a privilege of elite and remained a great luxury into the early 19th century. However, by 1861, Wang Tower wrote that opium was used even by rich peasants, and even a small village without a rice store would have a shop where opium was sold. Just go through the slide, you can see the picture. An Akagan smokes opium. Pipe contains opium mixed with the tobacco. The smoking of opium. The smoking of opium does not involve the burning of the material as might be imagined. Rather, the prepared opium is indirectly heated to temperatures at which the active alkaloids, chiefly morphine, are vaporized. In the past, smokers would use a specially designed opium pipe which had a removable knob like pipe. In the past, smokers would use a specially designed opium pipe which had a removable knob-like pipe bowl or fired earthenware attached by a metal fitting to a long cylindrical stem. Opium prohibitions in India, we can go through the opium prohibitions in China. Opium prohibition in China began in 1729. It was followed by nearly 2 centuries of increasing opium use. A massive destruction of opium by an emissary of Chinese Daogong Emperor in an attempt to stop opium smuggling led to the First Opium War, that was in 1839 to 1842, in which Britain defeated China. After 1860, opium use continued to increase with widespread domestic production in China. We can see that first opium war, that was on 1839, and it went up to 1942. First opium war, it was in between 1839 and 42. In response to the ever-growing number of Chinese people becoming addicted to opium, the King Duangong, the emperor, took strong action. In response to the ever-growing number of Chinese people becoming addicted to opium, the Qingdang emperor took a strong action to halt the smuggling of opium, including the seizures of cargo. In 1838, the Chinese commissioner Lin Suo destroyed 20,000 chests of opium in Gansu. Each chest was worth nearly $1,000 in 18,000. This was a substantial economical loss. The British Queen Victoria, not willing to replace the cheap opium with the costly silver, and began the First Opium War in 1840. The British winning the Hong Kong and trade concession, the first of a series of unethical treaties. The British Queen Victoria, not willing to replace the cheap opium with the costly silver, began the First Opium War in 1840. The British winning Hong Kong and trade concession in the first of the series of unequal treaties, that is Treaty of Nanjing. Now that we can know about this British assault on Canton, the First Opium War in May 1841. And the destruction of opium at Human, that was in June. Just to go through the pictures, there are different pictures that deals with this thing, that destruction of opium at Human, and it was in June 1839 this picture was drawn. Second Opium War, that it was between 1856 and 60. In 1850, saw a rapid growth of Western imperialism, and British demanded to renegotiate Treaty of Nanjing and open all China to British merchants companies. Canton was assaulted in 1847 and China lost the war. And to know about the Convention of Peking signed, China paid indemnity to British and France. Opium trade was legalized. Christians were granted civil rights. Just go through the slide, you can see that this British opium ships. Gladstone opposed opium trade. The opium trade incurred intense enmity from the later British Prime Minister William Ewart Gladstone. As a member of the Parliament, Gladstone called it most infamous and atrocious, referring to the opium trade between China and British India in particular. Gladstone was fiercely against both of the opium wars Britain waged in China in the First Opium War initiated 1840 and in the Second Opium War initiated in 1857, denounced British violence against the Chinese and was ardently opposed to the British trade in opium to China. Gladstone lambasted it as a palmist Gladstone lambasted it as Palmerston Opium War and said that he felt in dread of the judgment of God upon England for our national iniquity towards China in May 1840. You know that opium was legalized in China. Following China's defeat in Second Opium War in 1858, China was forced to legalize opium and began massive domestic production. Import of opium peaked in 1879 at 6,700 tons, and by 1906 China was producing 85% of the world's opium. That was nearly 35,000 tons, and 27% of its adult male population regularly used opium. 13.5 million people consuming 39,000 tons of opium yearly. From 1880 to the beginning of the communist era, the British attempted to discourage the use of opium in China. But this effectively promoted the use of morphine, heroin and cocaine, further exacerbating the problem of addiction. And to say about the Opium Act of India 1878, Britain's All India Opium Act of 1878 formalized ethnic restrictions on the use of opium, limiting recreational opium sales to registered Indian opium eaters and Chinese opium smokers only, and prohibiting its sale to workers from Burma. Likewise, in San Francisco, Chinese immigrants were permitted to smoke opium, so long as they refrained from doing so in the presence of whites. There was a storage house or warehouses of opium was also there in British East India Company in 1850. You can see the picture of this opium warehouses. Opium cultivation in India, we can go to that. After the 1757 Battle of Plassey, after the 1757 Battle of Plassey and the 1764 Battle of Buxar, the British East India Company gained the power to act as a Diwan of Bengal, Bihar and Odisha. This allowed the company to exercise a monopoly over the opium production and export it to India to encourage riots, tenant farmers to cultivate the cash crops of indigo and opium with the cash advances, and to prohibit the hoarding of rice. This strategy led to the increase of the land tax to 50% of the value of crops and to the doubling of East India Company's profit by 1777. It also claimed to have contributed to the starvation of 10 million people in Bengal famine of 1770. And to say about the opium cultivation of India, in India its cultivation as well as the manufacture and traffic to China were subject to British East India Company as a strict monopoly of the British government. Indian farmers were forced by the British East India Company to grow poppy against their wishes, often using a combination of strong arm tactics. Indian farmers were forced by the British East India Company to grow poppy against their wishes, often using a combination of strong arm tactics and debt. There was an extensive and complicated system of BEIC agencies involved in the supervision and management of opium production and distribution in India. To say about the opium cultivation, the history of opium cultivation in India, the beginning was in 1773. The British government began enacting oversight of the company's operations, and in response to the first war of the independence in 1857, this policy culminated in the establishment of direct rule over the presidencies and the provinces of British India. Bengal opium was highly priced, commanding twice the prices of the domestic Chinese products, which was regarded as the inferior. The Bengal opium was highly priced, commanding twice the price of the domestic Chinese product, which was regarded as an inferior in quality. Benjamin Bruman, that was in 1888. In England, the Home Director of the Chin Inland Mission, Benjamin Broomhall, was an active opponent of the opium trade, writing two books to promote the beginning of opium smoking: The Truth About Opium Smoking and the Chinese Opium Smoker. In 1888, Broomhall formed an In 1888, Broomhall formed and became secretary of the Christian Union for the Severeness of British Empire with the opium traffic and editor of its periodical, that is National Righteousness. He lobbied the British Parliament to stop the opium trade. He and James Laidlaw Maxwell appealed to the London Missionary Conference of 1888 and the Edinburgh Missionary Conference of 1910 to condemn the continuation of the trade. And truth about the opium smoking. No, this is the cover page of the book, Truth About the Opium Smoking. Just go through that. In USA, there was and there is restriction on use of opium. Abuse of opium in the United States began in the late 19th century and was largely associated with the Chinese immigrants. The drug was used freely until 1882, when a law was passed to confine opium smoking to specific dens. As 19th century progressed, however, Dr. Hamilton Wright worked to decrease the use of opium in the US by submitting the Harrison Act to Congress. This act put taxes and restriction on the sale and prescription of opium, as well as trying to stigmatize the opium poppy and its derivatives as demon drugs. So, it is to try to scare people away from them. The restrictions were recently redefined by the Federal Controlled Substances Act of 1970. This you can see that this amount of opium produced in China in 1908. Just go through the map. You can see each and every province has lot of opium production, and it was so popular in China in the early part of 19th century. 20th century, not in 19th century, it is 20th century, in the early part of 20th century. Mao Zedong, Mao Zedong government in 1950s, the government is generally credited with eradicating both the consumption and production of opium during the 1950s, using unrestrained repression and social reforms. 10 million addicts were forced into compulsory treatment. Dealers were executed, and opium producing regions were planted with new crops. Remaining opium production shifted to south of the Chinese border into the Golden Triangle region. The remnant opium trade primarily served Southeast Asia, but spread to American soldiers during the Vietnam War, with 20% of the soldiers regarding themselves was addicted during the peak of the epidemic in 1971. In 2003, China was estimated to have 4 million regular drug users and 1 million registered drug addicts. This prohibition outside China. This prohibition, it began in 1883. Opium importation was taxed at the rate of $6 US dollars to $300 US dollars per pound until the Opium Exclusion Act of 1909 prohibited the importation of opium altogether. In a similar manner, the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act of 1940, passed in fulfillment of International Opium Convention of 1912, normally placed a tax on the distribution of opiates, but served as a de facto prohibition of the drugs. Today, opium is regulated by Drug Enforcement Administration under the Control Act. By 1905, all Australian states and the territories had passed similar laws making prohibitions to opium sales. Smoking and possession was prohibited in 1908. And this hardening of Canadian attitudes towards Chinese opium users and fear of spread of the drug into the white population led to the effective criminalization of opium for non-medical use in Canada between 1908 and in the mid 1920s. This is the second part of this opium variants. This it's a wonderful nectar in palliative care. In the last session, we have discussed about this spread of opium trade and other things. And this chapter deals with the wonderful the use of opium, that is in palliative care. Thank you.